Welcome to Badaboom. On this episode of the podcast, we have on Hallow's Eve and Daredevil gang war writer Erica Schultz on the show. Schultz talks to us about their career in comics that include writing for Marvel, spectacular indie titles like Bylines and Blood, and breaking ground in the Spawn universe with Rat City. Listen in and Badaboom!
Hey, Erica, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for coming on. It's an exciting time for you. I think in terms of like getting you on, you have a lot of different projects, and one of the things we like sort of, and I'm always fascinated with our guests is just, especially writers and comics, like the way you guys are able to juggle so many things. Especially for me, I'm mainly a DC fan because I can only conceptualize one universe at a time. So to be able to kind of be able to do stuff like the independent stuff like Bylines in Blood, and then jump into something like an event like Gang War, or even launching a new side of a universe like with Rat City and the Spawn universe. Like, what's that like, sort of as a creator and a writer, to be in that position to be able to juggle all those things?
It is a lot. I will say this. I make a lot of notes. I write everything down in a notebook. So I'm constantly making notes. And it's not like one notebook for this thing and one notebook for that thing. It's like, okay, let me flop the page and now I'm going to write something from a completely different standpoint. So it's a little, I love Moon Knight. So it's kind of a little bit like dealing with all the different voices in your head, because you have all the different characters sort of shouting at you. But as I've been getting more and more projects, I've been learning, hopefully, how to keep everything under wraps and make my deadlines. But I mean, it is a lot, considering if it was all one universe, like if it was all Marvel or all DC or whatever, I think that it would be kind of easier, simply because everything's sort of playing off of each other. But, throwing in that wrench of Rat City and dealing with something completely different. I mean, obviously, I'm not complaining because I love the story and I love working with Shay and with Thomas and Todd and Yvette and everybody over at Todd McFarlane's group.
Awesome. Again, like, what's that feel like too? I think, although you're a freelancer, it's great to see like you be able to sort of be called upon to do some of these projects. So what's that feel like to be at a point in your career where you're able to sort of be in that position where, you're in that world of Spawn, the first female writer to take on that universe, but also to sort of be in a position where, hey, you had Hallow's Eve, you have Gang War going on, and sort of you're at this point in your career where you're sort of able to do so many things. And I know, like, as a freelancer, you're sort of always fighting for that, to sort of be in a position to kind of
Yeah.
have multiple things. So I know you're never kind of going to feel like, hey, I've made it, but it's always like, how's that feel to kind of be in that position? Are you able to kind of take a minute and be like, oh, wow, I did something?
There's a part of me that wants to sort of say, oh, hey, take a moment. You've worked really hard. But there's another part of me that is sort of the consummate freelancer, where it's like, if you take a break, what's going to happen? The phone's going to stop ringing, kind of
Yeah.
thing. And, I joke that I don't have the luxury of saying no to projects, which isn't true. I mean, because I have actually said no to a few projects recently, simply because, I just have too much on my plate. But the idea of, getting the emails from the editors, getting the phone calls saying, we'd like you to work on this. This is pretty much what I've been working towards, for the past 15 years, is to get to this point where I am top of mind for editors. Because a lot of times, editors will have their stable of writers or artists that they want to work with. And unless you've done something that is recent and gotten buzz and been, fans liked and had, all this, critics talking about it, then the editors are just sort of like, oh, well, we'll just go with so-and-so. We work with so-and-so all the time. So it's nice being sort of in that stable for an editor to be like, oh, hey, Erica, do you want to work on this? So that is fun. And like I said, that's something that I've been working toward. But as a freelancer, you're juggling a lot. You're juggling a lot of plates and, trying to keep everything straight in your head. And if you're doing a story that's a flashback story versus something that's happening right now, you've got to remember, oh, wait, that hasn't happened yet. Or, oh, wait, That's not going to happen, until 2025, but you happen to be aware of it because, you're on the Slack channel kind of thing. It's a lot of juggling. And I always tell people, if you are not good at time management, you cannot be a freelancer at all, because it's so much of phone calls. And I have, literally 4 different projects with 4 different editing teams. So it's a lot. But I am not complaining. I have an embarrassment. I have an embarrassment of riches right now. And I am very, very blessed for that.
Yeah, nothing like writing, Daredevil, Spawn, X-23, all those things.
Yeah.
And speaking of freelancing, like what turned me on to your work is like during the pandemic, I used to always like kind of pick up like a first issue of like an indie book. And I remember seeing Bylines and Blood and sort of like really kind of falling in love with that because of, how timely that was and sort of that story. Like I know sort of like there's weirdness with like Aftershock and stuff. Is there an opportunity to revisit that world? Because I do think a lot of the stuff sort of talked about in it, especially the state of journalism and sort of as you've seen with stuff like with what's happened with Sports Illustrated and stuff like that.
Which just happened.
Yeah.
Sports Illustrated. Yeah.
So a lot of that stuff that was, in that book, even though it's very present, it's still sort of like becoming more and more true. But are you able to revisit that? Or, again, I know it's like super weird with like Aftershock, but like for me, I think that's something I would love to see you revisit that. And I think as someone that, went to school for journalism, anytime I see a book on that, I'm like, oh, like comics, appreciate that.
I genuinely don't know what I can talk about legally, simply because it is an ongoing litigation. I will say that if I am given the opportunity to work with Van and Nick A again on the character of Sacha, I will jump at it, because we really enjoyed working on that. We really enjoyed collaborating with that. Honestly, I don't know what else I can say without getting anybody in trouble, myself included. But the best thing that I can say is I would love to revisit that character in that world.
Awesome.
And that's as benign as I can. That's as safe as I can say something.
Of course.
So
it was a shot in the dark. Like I said, I love that story, and I think as like things have kind of like progressed, like with AI and sort of. And you kind of see it not just in journalism, but I'm sure you see it in the arts. There's just a devaluation of the written word and what people do. And I think there was a lot in there that I think, especially if people revisit that book, they'll see it. Again, I love it. I won't push too much because I know you can't talk about it. But, another thing, Troy and I really loved was Hallow's Eve and how fun that book was. I think it was a great ride. And that was something that, especially with that character. And, sometimes in Marvel, things get like wrapped up in certain things you have to be a part of, like the top of mind of certain things, like a Spider-Man character and stuff. Even though she's in that universe, I felt like that book was really fun and different and really like, I think something you do well is just action. Like you were able to keep up the pace while like, focusing on the characters. And what was that like working on that book in particular? Because I think, when you're working in something like that in the Spider-Man universe and, obviously it had some tie-ins to what was going on, but you really were able to kind of do your own thing with that. So what was it like working on that project?
One of the things that I like to do in general is I like to shorten the length of time that a story takes place, because there's only so much damage. If the story takes place over months, then there's a lot of damage within the general universe that can happen, and that can then start influencing the story. So that whole story, with the exception of the epilogue, that whole story takes place over 3 days. And I was a little nervous because the character of Janine had been around since the 90s, but she wasn't really very fleshed out. She was simply just Ben's girlfriend. And she had had this tragic backstory that she was on the run because she had killed her father in self-defense. And I didn't want to sit there and lean on that, because the idea of a woman being a victim of assault to mark her, to make her bad or whatever is just a trope that's well overused. So I just wanted to make sure that we got the Ben connection, and we really made the story about Janine is not a bad person. She just is very focused. It's just her and Ben against the world. Basically, what she would love to do is just take Ben and go away to some island where nobody could bother them. Like, she doesn't want to be a bother to anybody, and she doesn't want anybody bothering her, but she also will not back down from a fight. And that's something that we sort of had to put together. We had to put forward. But to see this side of her, especially coming straight out of dark web, to see this side of her of, the world's treated me terribly, and now I'm the reason someone else's life has been ruined. The fact that she decides to help that person versus, just saying, oh, well, collateral damage. I think that that was an important thing for her as a character to see her turn. She will still be self-serving because in the world that we live in now, pretty much everybody is. I mean, you have to survive. But at the same time, if she sees somebody that she has directly negatively affected, she doesn't want that sort of on her conscience. And I thought it was a fun way to look at her. It was a little daunting, though, because whenever you play in the Spidey universe, which is, the sort of Spidey world, it's so big and has had so many hands in it over the years that you sort of want to, tread a very fine line of, can I say this? Can I do that? Is that going to affect something from, Amazing Fantasy number 15 versus, saying something that, just got retconned and you were unaware of it. So like I said, keeping the story to basically those 3 days kind of allowed me to do just enough damage for there to be a fun story, but not so much damage that the entire Spider universe collapses,
Yeah. When I was reading it, I was not expecting Spider-Man to show up at all, because it very much feels like it's just her story. And without Spider-Man showing up in it, I would have totally forgot that she's inside of that universe, because it's just her really the entire time, which it's a great story. And I really liked how the masks were used throughout the story. And I was curious, were there any masks that you wanted to use or put in the story that you were told, let's maybe not do that one, or we should save that one for a different story?
I was told that originally that I was using the witch mask too much, because if I wanted her to be able to do something that she didn't have a mask for, I would throw the witch mask on and have her say a spell. And it turned a little too tropey, and it turned a little too Deus Ex Machina. So I wanted to move things around. I did want the hero masks, which we saw in The Big Night. We saw her put on the Captain America mask and she became Captain Eve, which was really fun. And Michael Dowling, who was the artist through the miniseries and the one-shot, the design of Captain Eve, I think, is just phenomenal. And I've seen several Hallows Eve cosplayers. I would love to see a Captain Eve cosplayer. In terms of Spider-Man being in it, I would have preferred Spider-Man not being in it at all. But I will say this, when I was working with Nick Lowe, who's the senior editor, executive editor, I don't know, he's the grand poobah of Spider-Man. He said, we got to get Spider-Man in there. Spider-Man on a cover sells books. And I'm like, all right, fine. But then when we went to a second printing on the first issue, I was like, I don't know if we need Spider-Man. I mean, the story, the issue was already written and Michael had already been drawing it. I was like, but, I don't think we need Spider-Man on this cover to sell books. Mm. But yeah, I mean, we wanted to get Spider-Man in there. But also, I mean, Janine is able to sort of voice her opinion of Spider-Man, and her opinion of Peter is basically how Peter over the years has treated Ben. And that's kind of the way she sort of feels about everybody. It's like, have you interacted with Ben? Have you treated him terribly? And if you've treated him terribly, you're dead to me. And so her back and forth with Peter was interesting. And then when we did the ASM annual, she really let Peter have it. And I look at the annual as kind of like issue number 6 of the miniseries of Hallows Eve. So,
yeah. Well, speaking of the witch mask, when we were looking, I was doing some research for the interview, and I was like, wait, Erica wrote Charmed, my favorite TV show from when I was like in middle school. I was like,
I was in college when Charmed started. I was like a junior or senior in college when Charmed started. So I'm dating myself here.
Well, I was curious to know, what's it like to write a comic book for like a TV show where there's already like that material is already out there? What's it like to be part of that process? And are you writing stories that are fresh or trying to take put new life into the stories that were there in the TV show? What was that experience kind of like?
I did that for a few things. I did a graphic novel for the TV show Revenge. That was actually my first work for Marvel. It was back in 2014. I did a prequel to the first season of that show Revenge. I also worked on the Xena comics for a bit as well, and then and I worked on Charmed. For Charmed, the edict was, I mean, Charmed, when the show had ended, Zenoscope had the license and they had done like a season 8, season 9, season 10, that kind of thing, and continued the story. But when Dynamite got the license, and that's who I was writing Charmed under Dynamite, the edict was that you couldn't use Prue at all. We mentioned her in dialogue, but we did not see her because we weren't allowed to use the likeness of the actress. So we had that, and we could do anything from seasons 4 to 8. And I really liked the exploration of Paige, and I sort of fudged the timeline a little bit, but the idea of it's just before Piper knows that she's pregnant with Wyatt. It is close enough to after Prue's death that Leo is still feeling really down about it. And that's something that I made a point of that. I was actually on a Charmed podcast a few weeks ago, and I made a point of saying that I wanted one of the sisters to tell Leo that it was okay. So, a spoiler alert, the book's been out 6 years, so it's okay. But Phoebe is injured and Leo heals her, and he apologizes to her for not being quick enough. And she says, no, it's okay. And he sort of has this moment of like, I couldn't save Prue, and that broke my heart. And to have Phoebe tell him, look, like, we still love you. And I think that was kind of an important moment because the sisters mourned, and then it was business as usual. And I know the reason why they did that for the show and everything. But in terms of when you think of these characters as real people, the narrative there, I wanted to sort of address that. I also liked the idea of Paige was very much into her art in the beginning, and then that sort of fell away. So I wanted to make sure that we touched back on Paige's art and the fact that the young witch that she's mentoring is also an artist, is also a character who's into art, who's into all these creative ideas. Because I think one of the things that was interesting about Paige is that because she was an artist, she thought about things a little differently. She problem solved in different creative ways, which I thought was very cool. So I wanted to sort of expand on that.
That's awesome. It's funny you bring up Xena too. I have a funny Lucy Lawless story. Like when I watched that as a kid, like I was like 4 or 5 when Xena came out. And then years ago at New York Comic Con,
so old.
at New York Comic Con, I was a part of like a press roundtable with her for I think it was like Evil Dead or something. And she opened her mouth and she had a New Zealand accent, and I was like, "Oh my god!" I did not, because I only knew her for Xena as a kid. So like for a minute, it took me like 5 minutes to kind of like readjust and be like, my whole world has changed right now.
That's what Google's for.
Yeah, I know.
Everybody goes on IMDb. Oh, they were born where?
Yeah. But I learned, the hard and fast. But yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's, again, going back to sort of like what you do so well and sort of what like fascinates us and why we love having creators on is just sort of being able to sort of like go into those worlds and play with those toys in a way and expand the stories in interesting ways that maybe the property's never done. And I think, for example, like with Hallow's Eve, that's a character I never really interacted with, and now I'm sort of waiting for hopefully you be able to get that character again. And what's that like too, to sort of see, like you talked about it going to a second printing. There's a Marvel Legends figure of Hallow's Eve coming out or is already out. So what's that like too, to sort of be able to get the license to be able to put your spin on it, then be able to see people take on it, like whether it be cosplayers or action figures coming out, it going to a second printing. What's that feel like?
To be honest, it feels cool, but then there's the practical side of it. Like, I don't own the character. Like, I'm not making $1 million,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And I think that's something that people like don't. People think like, oh my god, you have an action figure, you're a millionaire. I'm like, nope.
No.
I don't see. I'm paying for my copy of the action
Yeah.
figure. I've already put mine on pre-order, kind of thing. So I think that with that perceived success, there's a lot of misconceptions. It's like, you've made it, you have an action figure. It's like, no, I don't have an action figure. I technically did not create the character. On paper, I did not create the character. I've written her more than I think pretty much anybody for now, but I didn't create the character. So I'm not, raking in things. I don't
Yeah.
have like a bag full of money behind me. And I know it's gauche to talk about money and everything, but this is a job, let's be honest. But in
Yeah.
terms of the sort of serotonin boost or dopamine, I don't know which one's which, but in terms of that boost to say, wow, you had 2 books that went to second printings last year. I had X-23 #1 and Hallows Eve #1. To share that with Mike Dowling and Brian Reber and Edgar Salazar and Carlos Lopez, who were on X-23, to share it with them was great. And Clayton Cowles lettered X-23, and Joe Caramagna lettered Hallows Eve. I want to give them a shout out too. I mean, that's great, because what that does is that tells the editors that I am somebody that you can keep bringing back. I am somebody who is, and I put it in air quotes, worth it. And I think that that's something that I think a lot of us sort of have to fight for all the time. Like I said before, have to be top of mind with an editor. I mean, my first professional job in comics was a Marvel job in 2014 when I wrote the Revenge graphic novel, and I thought, I've arrived. And then I didn't hear from Marvel for 4 years. I didn't hear back from Marvel until 2018. And I did a Daredevil one-shot, a Daredevil annual. I thought, I've arrived. And then I didn't hear back from Marvel for years again. So, I mean, I had to chase them down in late 2021 because I had heard from someone about the Moon Knight anthology. And I absolutely love Moon Knight. He's my favorite character. So I chased them down for that Moon Knight anthology. And it did well enough. And I guess I impressed them enough that they then asked me to do X-23, and then that led to Hallows Eve, which led to Daredevil again, and more and more. But I mean, it's you don't just get it and
Yeah.
it keeps going, So I think people kind of get surprised when they hear that there are these large, not months, 4-year gaps,
Yeah.
between things. And I think people really get surprised by that, because you sort of think, oh, well, somebody's name's on a book and then that's it. No, I mean, you gotta keep, fighting and pushing and everything. So
Yeah. And with that, like, again, that level of success, like, do you see
always
yourself?
in air quotes,
Yeah.
success.
Yeah. Because I think as a freelancer, you're always sort of, again, work, like, it's like almost like a never ending ladder. Do you see yourself sort of investing more on the creator owned side now that you've had some bigger books? Do you see yourself, like, career wise, sort of diving into that a little bit more to kind of, not just the creative fulfillment, but also sort of the idea of being able to own that, when that
Yeah.
success, you get to participate in that success a little bit differently than you do, when there's a Hallows Eve action figure. And I'm sure it's a little bit different, if one day there's, obviously can't talk too much about it, but Bylines and Blood, like TV show or something like that, is very different than seeing, maybe Hallows Eve appearing in a Spider-Verse movie. So do you see
Yeah.
yourself sort of diving into that a little bit more now that, you've obviously had a string of really successful books? You're diving into the Spawn universe. So it's, your name is not just ringing in editors' names, but also the audience. They're going to see Erica Schultz book and be like, okay, like I know this is quality. I'm gonna dive in. So do you see yourself using that more to pursue that?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, because I still want to finish up Christabel Volume 2. We did a Kickstarter for Christabel last year. I want to finish. I'm mostly through the script for Christabel Volume 2 that I have to get off to my editor, James Emmett. But at the same time, there is a balance, because when you're doing creator owned, a lot of time you're financing. So you're financing it on your own. So you have to do the commercial work to be able to, save the money to then be able to, because I'm the type of person where I'm not going to pay terrible rates. Like I want, everybody deserves to eat, honest to God. And I'm going to pay somebody so they can eat. And I'm also not going to be like, you've got to get this done in X amount of days. No. So I want to work with their schedule, especially with Christabel Amagoya Aguirre. I mean, each volume of Christabel is 60 pages. So it's not just like a quick monthly. So I want to make sure that she has the time on the schedule. I'm helping with colors on that to sort of lighten her load. And I want to make sure that she has the time to be able to work on that. And I don't want to hand her a script and say, I expect this in how many. No, it's this is this. Let's talk about schedules. Let's see what you can do. So, yeah, so I would love to lean more into creator owned, to have more ownership of characters and things like that. But at the same time, the way to do that is to do more commercial work, to be able to sort of, build your name up more and such. I'm also actually more curious to see now that, well, no, not now that, but sometimes some people know my name a little bit more now because of more Marvel work. So I'm curious to see if I'm going to start getting calls from retailers saying, hey, can we get M3? Can we get Deadliest Bouquet? Can we get, Christabel or Bylines or, any number of the independent work that I've done, as a matter of sort of opening up the library of the work that I've done. And that would be interesting, now that my name's on more Marvel books. But honestly, I genuinely, I don't know. I mean, every time I think I've figured things out, the universe, decides to show me that I don't know what I'm talking about. So I'm just sort of like riding the wave as best I can and trying not to fall off the board. And if I do, swim for my life.
I think you're surfing pretty good right now. So
knocking on wood. Knocking on
of
wood.
course. And one last thing, sort of. Soon, like the world will be able to, experience Rat City, which was announced at New York Comic Con. So, what's that ride been like? I know it's a pretty big book. Like you're able to sort of be the first one, and sort of it's hard to sort of find a new corner of a universe that's been established for 30 years. But you have this. You're sort of breaking ground on the future of the Spawn universe. So, what's that experience been like? And have you felt like, again, like that's one of those other things where you're like, oh, like this is pretty cool. There's probably going to be a McFarlane's toy version of this character that hopefully they give you for free. Knock on wood. But yeah, what's that been like?
It has definitely been a journey. Speaking with Thomas at New York Comic Con last year, not this past New York, sorry, 2022, and Joe Prado, who is a phenomenal artist and rep for a lot of great artists. Thomas had gone to Joe and spoken to him and said, we're looking to sort of expand stuff and open up. And Joe had mentioned my name. And when Thomas and I talked, it was, hey, maybe you could do something for She Spawn or Scorched or something like that. And, like I said, as a freelancer, I'm open to anything.
Yeah.
But when we got on the phone and I just started riffing about this idea about going into the future and really mining this idea about this veteran like Al, who didn't die in battle or wasn't killed in battle, but still becomes a Spawn. Because I know the original lore is you could only be a Spawn if you're dead, and then that sort of morphed into other things. I wanted to sort of lean into that. But also, putting the story 90 to 100 years into the future helps a good bit, because you're distancing yourself from Al. The other thing is that all of this comes down to 300-301 when Al detonated what I'm calling the God Bomb. I know it's the necroplasmic detonation, but that is so complicated to say. So I just say the God Bomb. So when Al detonates the God Bomb in 300-301, it ripples across time and space. So think about it as, in Marvel, you would call it a Nexus event. You have Nexus beings that can walk between time and space in different multi-dimensions. this is a nexus event. This is an event that did not only affect Al's timeline, but it affected timelines before, timelines after, timelines in other worlds, other expanses. And I wanted to play with that idea because we can pretty much do anything with it. Obviously, you want to stay within the world of Spawn, and obviously, keeping with the look of the character and such. But they've been saying this from the beginning. This is a Spawn book that reads like a Spawn book, but is different from Spawn books. It's a genre mashup. And it's also, I think I have a different perspective than some people. I'm not saying that I'm the only person who could write this. Absolutely not. But I think I have a different perspective from some people. And I know people have been making a big deal about me being the first female writer on it and stuff. I never set out to be a good female writer. I just set out to be a good writer, to tell good stories and for people to enjoy them and for people to maybe learn something, for people to maybe think, hey, maybe I'm going to think about something else, or maybe I'm going to change my opinion on something, or maybe I'm even just going to expand my opinion on something because of something that I read. So I'm not looking to educate people. I'm just looking for people to sort of open their mind a little bit. And whether it's, hey, there's a chick writing Spawn and that does it, or hey, I'm a big Spawn fan and I pick up anything Spawn anyway, or just people fans of sci-fi. If you've never read Spawn before, maybe check this out. And I think that's what they're trying to do with this whole new universe that they're doing. You've got medieval, you've got gunslinger, you've got scorched, you've got John Layman is writing, Spawn Kills Every Spawn, which is like, it's kind of like Spawn meets I Hate Fairyland, which is just total bonkers. And it's great. But it's now not just, oh, here's Spawn, that 90s comic book. It's now, here's Spawn if you like Westerns. Here's Spawn if you like fantasy. Liam Sharp is doing this phenomenal fantasy book, which is great. There's Focus that's coming out. Here's Spawn if you like superhero stuff. Here's Spawn if you like horror, where you've got like Mercy and No Home Here. There's so much, and I think that it's high time that the universe has expanded so much. And I think that it's really going to be like a Spawn for every kind of person. And even if you don't think of yourself as a Spawn fan, maybe pick one up, because the genre is different artists, different mindsets, different thought processes. We're really sort of breaking a lot of things down. So I think it'll be a really sort of a new renaissance.
If you weren't around in the 90s when it came out, it's hard to kind of like jump into it. And I think sort of things like Rat City and a lot of the things they're doing bring a lot of people in, which I think comics should do more of. Like, hey, here's a gateway book. You may read this and you may never read another Spawn, but maybe you like this one.
When I finished writing issue number six, I think is going to be, when people read it, they're going to first start reading and be like, what? Oh. And it's going to go through some stuff that is, if you've never read Spawn before, it's going to catch you up. And if you've always read Spawn, you're going to be like, oh, I know what that's from. So issue number 6, I think, is when I handed it in, Thomas Healy, the editor-in-chief at Todd McFarlane Productions, when I handed it in, he's like, huh, interesting. I didn't know this was going to go this way. I like this. I was like, all right, good. I'll send my invoice. You like the script? It's approved. My invoice is sent in.
Yeah. Cut the check.
Yeah, exactly. Cut the check.
Yeah. Where can people find you? And like, is there anything else that you're working on that you want people to check out that you could talk about?
So you can find me online. I am on Twitter, because I refuse to call it X, and Blue Sky at Erica Schultz 42. I'm on Instagram at Erica Schultz Writes, WRITES. And ericaschultzwrites.com is where you can find all my books. I also do, it's a really bizarre hobby, but I do like different types of weaving and things like that. Like I just made a cool like woven bookmark for my niece and everything. And I just do that and stuff. Call it friendship bracelets, whatever you want. It keeps my hands busy. And yeah, I've got Daredevil Gang War is coming out. So February, March, and April, there's going to be some more stuff announced. And April 10th, I believe, is the first issue of Rat City in stores.
Awesome. Well, thank you. This was awesome. And with that, bada boom.
Bada boom.
Bada boom.
Thank you for listening to the Badaboom podcast. Keep the conversation going with Chris and I on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. You can find us on all these places at Badaboom Podcast. Get into the comments on our YouTube channel. Let us know what you like about the show or what you'd like to hear from us in the future. Until next time, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Thanks for listening.